The papers hit the table with a slap that echoed through the old living room. My eldest son leaned forward, his voice sharp as steel. "Dad, this house isn't yours anymore." I froze. My hand trembled as I stared at the document. Bold letters, cold signatures, and my name printed as if I had already agreed. Then, rip. He tore our wedding photo in half, the frame clattering against the wood. My wife's smile, my own younger face, split into two pieces, tossed at my feet. The room spun, but my eyes rose to the ceiling. Above us, hidden in the attic, lay a box untouched for decades, my wife's last secret. If your children erased your life's work for money, would you fight back? Or would you stay silent, forgotten in your own home? Stay until the end. The attic holds a voice that can change everything. I was 73 years old, and my world had narrowed to the creaking walls of the house I had guarded for half a century. My wife and I had bought it when we were barely starting out, just two dreamers with more hope than money. Over the years, the house became more than timber and bricks. It was a diary of our lives, with each scratch on the floor and each faded photo on the wall marking another chapter. Now the paint peeled, the floor groaned, and the pipes whined each morning. Outsiders might see a worn-down building, but to me, it was a cathedral. In the attic, dust lay thick over boxes filled with letters, toys, and tapes, memories my wife and I had promised never to throw away. One box in particular had remained untouched since her funeral. I had never dared open it because I knew she had left it for a moment when I would truly need her. My three children saw none of this. My eldest son, Robert, arrived often with spreadsheets and appraisals. He would place papers on the table explaining the market value, telling me how much easier life would be if I just sold. To the neighbors, he acted like a concerned son, talking about safety and health care. But his eyes always flickered with calculation, not compassion. My daughter Claire was gentler. She came with flowers, sat beside me, and spoke in a soft voice. "Dad, maybe moving to a smaller place would be better for your health. We only want what's best for you." Her tone was sweet, but her words echoed her brother's arguments. Deep down, I wondered if she truly believed them, or if she simply lacked the strength to oppose him. And then there was Daniel, my youngest. He lived in another state, busy with his own young family, but every call carried warmth. He asked not about the house, but about me. I felt his absence painfully, especially when Robert and Claire came together, their voices pressing against my will. One evening, Robert spread blueprints on the kitchen table. "Dad," he said, "this place is falling apart. Look at these cracks. Look at the cost of repairs. Do you really want to waste your last years worrying about bills and maintenance?" I shook my head. This isn't waste. This is home. The tension grew sharper each week. Claire sighed heavily whenever I refused. Robert grew impatient, his visits more frequent, his tone harder. He kept repeating, "Think of us, Dad. Think of your grandchildren. The money could change everything." But I knew what he really meant. The money could change his life, not mine. One afternoon, as I walked past the porch, I saw a stranger with a clipboard measuring the yard. My heart sank. He wasn't a passerby, he was a real estate agent. Robert had invited him without a word to me. The man smiled awkwardly, said he was just evaluating, and left. That was the moment I understood they weren't just suggesting anymore. They were planning behind my back. I climbed the stairs slowly that night, each step groaning like an old friend warning me. In the attic, the single bulb glowed weakly. Dust swirled around as I sat among boxes labeled with my wife's handwriting. My hand rested on the sealed wooden box we had never opened. I whispered to the silence, "Am I stubborn, or am I the only one keeping her promise alive? Have you ever sacrificed everything only to be called stubborn?" The days blurred together, each one carrying the same routine. Morning coffee on the porch, birdsong breaking through the silence, and my wife's rose bushes struggling to bloom without her gentle hands. I tried to keep the garden alive, trimming where I could, watering when my knees allowed. Every petal, every thorn reminded me of her. Yet whenever Robert came, he brushed past the flowers without a glance. He carried folders and numbers, not memories. "Dad, the foundation is cracking. Look at this wall, it's leaning. Insurance won't cover this forever. Don't you understand? You're risking everything by staying here." I wanted to tell him I had already risked everything for this house. I had sacrificed promotions, better jobs, easier lives because I believed in this place. I believed in raising my children under this roof. Claire visited with baked pies and soft smiles. She always began gently asking about my health, my medications, whether I was lonely. But before she left, her tone changed. "Dad, you deserve comfort. Selling this place doesn't mean we're forgetting Mom. It just means moving forward." Her words stung. Moving forward to her meant tearing down the very place that carried my wife's laughter. Nights grew heavy. I often sat alone in the living room, the grandfather clock ticking like a heartbeat. Shadows stretched across the hallway, pointing toward the attic door at the end. Sometimes I swore I heard her voice, faint and warm, calling me there, but fear kept me away. If I opened that box too soon, what if the promise vanished with the dust? One Sunday after church, neighbors gathered in my yard. I overheard whispers. "Such a shame. That house could sell for a fortune." Robert smiled politely, agreeing while I stood a few feet away, invisible. It was as if I had already been erased. Later that week, Claire brought her children. They ran through the hallways, their laughter echoing. But instead of joy, I felt a chill when Robert leaned toward me and said, "See, they don't belong in a crumbling place like this. They need something modern. Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be." I clenched my fists. I wanted to shout, but my voice cracked. To them, I wasn't a guardian of history. I was an obstacle. That night, unable to sleep, I walked the house with a candle. I traced my fingers along the photographs on the wall, the wedding portrait now missing the graduation pictures, the birthdays. Every smile told me I was not crazy to hold on. But the pressure was mounting. Bills piled up. Robert's calls grew sharper. Claire's sighs turned to tears, accusing me of being unreasonable. And Daniel, my youngest, was too far away, too busy to intervene. I could not ask him to carry this weight. Then came the knock at the door. Another stranger, briefcase in hand, wearing a realtor's badge. He greeted me by name, said Robert had scheduled an appointment. My chest burned with betrayal. They were no longer waiting for my consent. They were moving forward as if I were already gone. I closed the door in his face, my hands shaking. Upstairs, the attic door loomed in the shadows. For the first time in years, I felt its pull. Perhaps the answers lay not in arguing with my children, but in the promise my wife had left behind. I whispered into the silence, "Am I clinging to the past, or am I the last one who remembers what this house means?" I was not always an old man clinging to dusty walls. Once I was a husband, a father, and a craftsman with hands that shaped wood into tables and cabinets sturdy enough to outlast decades. This house was my greatest creation, not because I built it with lumber, but because I filled it with life. When my wife Margaret and I first moved in, the place was nothing but a shell. The roof leaked, the stairs sagged, and the paint peeled like old skin. We worked side by side, every paycheck stretched thin, every hour after my shift spent hammering, sanding, or painting. She laughed through the exhaustion, reminding me that a home was not measured by square footage, but by love. As the children grew, each corner absorbed their voices. Robert, my eldest, once carved his initials into the banister after a tantrum. I scolded him, but Margaret smiled and said, "Leave it. Someday we'll want to remember he was small enough to reach that height." Claire, delicate and dreamy, plastered her bedroom walls with drawings of horses and fields. Daniel, the youngest, turned the attic into his kingdom fortresses of cardboard boxes, toy soldiers patrolling dust-covered beams. We had offers to sell even back then. Developers eyed the land, its proximity to the city, its potential for profit. One afternoon, a man in a suit came with numbers that made my head spin. I considered it. If I sold, I could pay off debts, buy newer cars, maybe even take Margaret on a vacation she deserved. But she placed her hand on mine and whispered, "Some things aren't for sale." Her eyes glistened with quiet fire. That night I turned down the offer. The man shook his head, muttered that sentiment wouldn't pay bills, and left. Margaret kissed me as if I had won a war. I worked longer hours after that, taking carpentry jobs others refused. I built cabinets for restaurants, pews for churches, even caskets when times were hard. Every plank I touched carried the weight of sacrifice. Yet whenever I dragged myself home, Margaret's cooking, the children's laughter, and the familiar scent of cedar in the walls healed me. The attic became our family's vault. We stored Christmas ornaments. Margaret's letters and cassette tapes filled with lullabies she sang to the children. She insisted on recording them, said one day they might need to remember her voice. I teased her about being dramatic, but she only smiled as if she knew something I did not. Then illness came. Margaret grew frail, her laughter softer, her steps slower. The hospital visits drained our savings, but I would have given everything if it meant keeping her one more day. One evening, as the sun bled through the curtains, she reached for my hand. "Promise me never sell this house," she whispered. "It must remain yours until your last breath." I promised. My chest broke as I watched her slip away, but the vow bound me tighter than any contract. After her funeral, I wandered the attic in silence. Dust floated like spirits in the single beam of light. That was when I noticed the sealed wooden box. Margaret had placed it there, her handwriting labeling it simply, "For later." I touched the lid but could not bring myself to open it. Perhaps I feared what later truly meant. Years passed. Robert became ambitious, his eyes fixed on wealth. He once told me, "Dad, you wasted your life working like a mule for this old place." He laughed when I refused to refinance, calling me stubborn. I saw in him a hunger I could never feed. Claire wavered like the tide. Sometimes she held my arm and said she understood why I clung to the house. Other times she sighed, urging me to be practical, to think of inheritance. She lived between guilt and persuasion, unable to anchor herself. Daniel alone remembered. On his visits, he would slip into the attic, blow dust off toy boxes, and sit cross-legged as if he were still 10 years old. He would ask me about Mom, about the nights we stayed up telling stories under the rafters. He said the attic smelled like her perfume, faint but present. But Daniel moved away, and with his distance, my defense weakened. Robert's voice grew louder. Claire's softer pleas more insistent. I became the stubborn old man, the obstacle to progress. Yet every night when I passed the attic door, I felt Margaret's presence. I imagined her voice recorded on those tapes waiting. I thought of her words. "Some things aren't for sale." I clung to them as the world around me shifted. The years after Margaret's passing felt like walking through fog. I kept working my hands fixing chairs and tables for neighbors, but every evening I returned to a house that echoed with her absence. Still, I refused to let go. I remembered one winter when Robert suggested again that I sell. He brought a glossy brochure from a new development. "Dad, you could move into a retirement condo. Heated floors, elevators, community events. You'd never have to worry about shoveling snow again." I looked at the picture of a sterile white lobby and said, "Do they have the mark on the banister where you carved your name? Do they have the corner where Claire learned to read? Do they have the attic where Daniel laughed himself to sleep? No, then they don't have my home." He called me impossible. But deep inside I knew he simply didn't understand that a house carries the spirit of those who lived within it. Claire once tried another approach. She sat beside me in the garden, her hand on mine. "Dad, I know you loved Mom, but moving doesn't mean you're betraying her. Don't you want to be closer to me and the kids?" I stared at her, torn. I loved her children dearly, but I could not abandon the promise I had made. Daniel, when he visited, often asked about the box in the attic. "Did Mom ever tell you what was inside?" I shook my head. "No, she just wrote for later." He looked at it with a mixture of curiosity and reverence, but he never pressed further. Somehow we both knew it wasn't time yet. One night I dreamed of Margaret. She was standing in the attic light, streaming behind her, holding the box. She whispered, "Not yet, but soon." I woke with tears soaking my pillow. That dream followed me for weeks. Neighbors spoke of me as eccentric, the old man who wouldn't move. At church, some pitied me, others admired me. A few even envied that I had something so precious I would fight to keep it. Through all of this, Robert hardened. He measured value in dollars, not memories. He saw my refusal as defiance, a barrier to his own ambitions. Claire drifted between guilt and persuasion, never quite choosing sides. And Daniel, though his calls warmed me, remained too far away, unable to shield me when the storm gathered. But I was not simply clinging to bricks and mortar. I was clinging to Margaret's last breath, her last words. I was clinging to the laughter of my children when they were young, to the nights of Christmas songs in the attic, to the smell of pine needles and cinnamon. Every creak of the floorboard, every chip of paint, every faded curtain was a chapter of our story. To sell it would not be to move forward. It would be to erase us. And though the world insisted I was stubborn, in my heart I believed I was keeping a sacred promise. The day of the family meeting arrived like a storm I'd been dreading for years. Robert called it a discussion, but I knew better. Discussions meant compromise, and there was no compromise left in him. He came first, crisp shirt, polished shoes folder under his arm. He sat at the head of my dining table as if it already belonged to him. Claire followed carrying a pie, her smile stretched too thin to hide the tension. Dad. Robert began tapping the folder. We need to finalize this. The market is at its peak. If we wait any longer, the value could drop. You can't afford that kind of loss. I leaned back, folding my arms. I told you before, this house is not for sale. Robert's jaw tightened. You're being unreasonable. Do you even realize how much money is sitting in these walls? Claire and I have talked. We agree it's time. Claire looked at me, her eyes uncertain. Dad, maybe Robert's right. You've carried this house long enough. Don't you deserve peace? A smaller place, less responsibility. I felt my chest tighten. Their words stabbed not because of the money, but because they spoke as though I were already incapable, a burden waiting to be moved. This is my home, I said firmly. Your mother wanted me here. She wanted this house to stand until my last breath. Robert exhaled sharply, then slid the folder across the table. Then explain this. I opened it and felt the blood drain from my face. It was a notarized document, my own signature scrawled across the bottom. A durable power of attorney authorizing Robert to act on my behalf regarding the property. I never signed this, I whispered, though the ink told me otherwise. You did? Robert replied coolly. At the hospital last year. Remember? You were weak, confused. I told you it was for medical decisions. But you signed. And it's legal. Claire gasped softly, covering her mouth. I felt the room tilt beneath me. The memory flickered, painkillers, tubes, papers thrust under my hand. Robert insisting it was necessary. My hand had trembled as I scrawled my name, too tired to question. You tricked me, I said hoarsely. Robert leaned forward, voice low and merciless. No, Dad. I saved you from yourself. This house is an anchor, and I won't let you drown us all clinging to it. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but not for me. She looked at Robert, then at me, and whispered, Maybe it's for the best. Dad, stop being selfish. You've had your life. It's our turn now. Her words sliced deeper than any knife. My own daughter, once the gentlest soul, now echoed his betrayal. At that moment, a knock came at the door. Robert rose and opened it. A man in a tailored suit stepped in, a realtor smiling with professional ease. He shook Robert's hand before glancing at me with polite indifference. This is the property, he asked. Yes, Robert answered. We'll be listing it soon. I slammed my palm on the table. You will not. The realtor's smile didn't falter. He leaned toward Robert, lowering his voice. But I heard it anyway. Once the old man is out, we'll flip this place for triple. Robert smirked. Exactly. I felt my world collapse. The realtor left with a polished smile and promises of buyers already interested. The slam of the door echoed like a verdict. I stood in the silence, my children's eyes avoiding mine. Robert broke first. Dad, you should be thanking me. You'll be taken care of. We'll put you somewhere safe. No more worries, no more bills. Just rest. Rest. I spat the word. You want me to rest in a coffin too, because that's the only place I'll be if you strip me from this house. Claire flinched, but Robert's lips curled into a smirk. You're being dramatic. This isn't betrayal. It's business. Grow up, Dad. I slammed my fist on the table. Business. This house raised you. Every nail, every beam, my sweat built it. Your mother's hands polished these floors. And you call it business. For a heartbeat, his eyes flickered. Then the mask returned. You're old. You don't understand the world anymore. The future doesn't wait for sentiment. Claire finally spoke, tears trembling in her voice. Dad, maybe you don't see it, but Robert's right. This house is falling apart. You're not well. You can't live here forever. Stop, I whispered, voice breaking. Please, Claire, don't do this. She looked away. I'm sorry. It felt like knives pressing into my chest, two children united in betrayal. That night I sat in the dark living room. The walls seemed to close in, whispering with memories of laughter, now replaced by silence. I thought of Daniel. Would he too join their chorus if he were here, or would he remember what the attic meant, what Margaret's last words meant? Days blurred. Robert returned with more papers. Claire avoided my eyes. A large sign appeared in the yard, for sale, in bold red. Neighbors paused, shocked, whispering. I wanted to tear it down, but my hands shook too violently. One evening I heard voices outside. Robert stood with the realtor, pointing at the garden. I stepped closer to the window, and that was when I heard it. Once he's gone, this place will triple. We'll gut it, modernize it, sell it off fast. Easy money. Robert's laughter joined the realtor's. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My own son laughing at the idea of erasing me. The next morning, Claire confronted me. Dad, stop fighting. It's over. The papers are real. The court will side with Robert. You'll just embarrass yourself. I stared at her hollow. Embarrass myself for honoring your mother, for keeping the promise I swore as she died. She shook her head, tears spilling. I can't do this anymore. I can't watch you destroy yourself. And with those words, she left, alone. I wandered into the kitchen. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, hollow eyes, frail shoulders, a man stripped of his dignity. I pressed my forehead to the glass and whispered, "Am I already dead to them?" The house groaned. The floorboards creaked as if answering. But deep inside, something stirred. A faint memory. The attic. The sealed box. Margaret's promise. I clenched my fists. They wanted me gone. But I wasn't gone yet. The days that followed were not measured by the sun, but by the sound of footsteps that no longer belonged to me. Contractors came and went, clipboards and hand tape measures stretched across the rooms I once called sacred. They spoke in rapid jargon, square footage, resale value, gutting costs, while Robert nodded approvingly. To them, the house was a carcass waiting to be stripped. To me, it was still alive, bleeding with every careless measurement. I tried to protest, to stand between them and the walls, but my voice trembled and broke. Robert dismissed me with a wave. "Dad, don't embarrass yourself. It's already in motion. You're only making this harder. What could be harder than watching your children erase you in real time?" Claire avoided my gaze. She carried tea to the men, offered polite smiles. And when she saw my fury, she whispered, "It's for the best." The words echoed, haunting me through sleepless nights. Neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Halloway from across the street stopped me one morning. "I hear Robert's selling the place. Good for you, dear. At your age, you deserve to relax." Her words crushed me more than Robert's papers. Even the neighbors believed the story that I was willingly stepping aside, not being forced. I wanted to scream the truth, but my throat locked. Shame pressed me into silence. The for sale sign in the yard became a beacon of betrayal. Strangers slowed their cars to gawk. Some even stepped out, peering into windows as if I were already gone. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. One night I found Robert in the living room with the realtor. They were laughing, glasses of whiskey in hand. The realtor gestured at the staircase. "Once we rip that out, open up the floor plan, this place will be unrecognizable. Buyers love open concepts." "Perfect," Robert said. "Tear it down. I want nothing of the old structure left." I stumbled into the room, fury burning through my veins. "You can't tear it down." "This banister holds your childhood, Robert. Don't you remember carving your name into it?" He stared at me coldly. "That scar on the wood? It lowers the value. Memories don't pay." I turned to Claire, desperate. "Claire, tell him you drew on those walls as a child. You cried in this hallway when you lost your first pet. Does none of that matter?" She bit her lip, eyes glistening. For a moment I thought she might side with me, but then she whispered, "It's just a house, Dad. Just a house." The words cracked like thunder inside my chest. Nights became unbearable. I wandered from room to room, touching walls, tracing grooves in the floor, pressing my ear to the wood as if the house might still speak. Sometimes I thought I heard Margaret's laughter in the creak of the stairs, or Daniel's giggles echoing in the attic. I clung to those phantom sounds because the living voices had turned against me. I dreamed often of Margaret. In one dream, she stood at the foot of the attic stairs pointing to the box. Her lips moved, but no sound came. I woke drenched in sweat, heart racing. I told myself she was guiding me, reminding me that not all was lost. Robert's aggression escalated. He hired movers to inventory the furniture. They walked through with stickers and clipboards, tagging chairs, cabinets, even my wife's sewing table. When I protested, Robert snapped, "It's better to organize now than wait. You don't need all this junk." "Junk," I cried. "She made clothes for you on that table. Every stitch was love." Robert rolled his eyes. "It's wood, Dad. Don't romanticize trash." Claire stood by the door, arms crossed, her silence a betrayal louder than words. The humiliation deepened. One afternoon, Robert brought a banker to assess the property. They spoke in numbers, ignoring me completely. I was invisible in my own dining room. When I tried to interject, the banker smiled condescendingly. "Sir, everything will be taken care of. You'll be comfortable." Comfortable, I felt like livestock being relocated to pasture before slaughter. But even as despair strangled me, a seed of defiance grew. Every time I passed the attic, the box called to me. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. "Promise me." I began to believe that inside that box was not just paper, but salvation. Still, I hesitated. Fear whispered, "What if the box held nothing? What if I had clung to an illusion all these years?" Yet when the realtor returned with blueprints of demolition, I realized hesitation was a luxury I no longer had. If I didn't fight, everything would be destroyed: my home, my vow, my dignity. One night I overheard Robert on the phone. His voice was hushed but urgent. "Yes, it's already done. The power of attorney gives me full control. The old man can protest, but legally he's finished. We'll close the sale in weeks." He paused, then laughed. "He doesn't even know what's coming." My knees nearly buckled. Betrayal was no longer hidden. It was celebrated. I walked into the kitchen, gripping the counter until my knuckles turned white. My reflection in the dark window stared back at me, a frail old man whose children saw him as nothing more than a signature on a deed. I whispered to the empty room, "Margaret, I need you. I can't do this alone." And for the briefest moment, I swore I heard her voice in the creak of the attic floor above me. The next day, Claire arrived with her children again. They ran through the hallways laughing, their joy stabbing me with memories of when my children were small. Claire pulled me aside. "Dad, you're hurting yourself by resisting. Please let go." I stared at her, trembling. "Let go of what?" "Your mother's promise, my life's work, my soul." She cried softly. "I don't want to fight anymore." "You don't want to fight," I said bitterly, "because you've already surrendered." Her tears fell, but she didn't argue. She turned away, leaving me alone with the echoes of children's laughter that no longer belonged to me. I realized then Robert had the papers, Claire had surrendered, and the world saw me as senile. I was cornered, erased, already written out of my own story. But the house still breathed with me, and in its heartbeat I felt Margaret's whisper, the attic, the box, the promise. The days grew colder, though it was not yet winter. Perhaps it was only the chill of betrayal that froze the air inside my home. Each morning I woke expecting silence, but instead I heard Robert on the phone arranging inspections, talking as though I no longer lived there. Claire stopped visiting with pies. When she came at all, it was only to repeat her quiet mantra, "Dad, it's time to move on." I moved through the house like a prisoner, my footsteps echoing against memories that no longer shielded me. I touched the walls, the banister, the window panes, trying to memorize them before they were gone. One evening, I found the realtor's card on the counter. Robert must have left it there deliberately, as if mocking me. The words, "Pending sale," scrawled across the back. My chest ached so sharply I thought I might collapse. I sat in Margaret's old rocking chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and spoke aloud into the empty room. "They think I am finished. They think age makes me blind, but I see clearly now. This house breathes with me, and I will not let them bury it alive." Outside, the for sale sign loomed, red letters glowing in the dusk like a wound. Neighbors passed without looking at me anymore. To them, I was already gone. But upstairs, the attic waited, the box waited, and I knew before this battle ended, I would open it. Have you ever watched your own children turn your life into profit? If this was your father, would you fight, or would you let it go? The house was quiet after they left, yet it was not peace. Silence pressed against my chest like a heavy stone. Outside, the for sale sign stood like a gravestone planted in the yard, announcing my death before I had drawn my last breath. I sat in Margaret's rocking chair, its gentle creak the only heartbeat left in the house. For hours, I did not move. I listened to the stillness broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each tick mocked me, old, stubborn, finished. Those were the words my children used, though they tried to disguise them in softer tones. To them, I was no longer father. I was an obstacle, a relic, a signature they needed to move forward. I remembered when Robert was small, climbing onto my shoulders and calling me a giant. Back then I was strength, safety, everything he wanted to become. Now he looked at me as a man to be managed, a burden dragging him down. I thought of Claire, who once slipped her hand into mine at the county fair, terrified of losing me in the crowd. She used to say, "Daddy, don't ever let go." And yet she had let go first. She saw my love as selfishness. My loyalty is madness. The weight of betrayal crushed me more than any illness ever had, not because of the house alone, but because of the promises broken, theirs to me, mine to Margaret. I had sacrificed promotions, sold land, worked through nights so that they could go to college, wear good shoes, live without hunger. I carried debts so they could walk free. I gave them everything, and now they gave me nothing but signatures that erased me. I stared at my hands. They were calloused, cracked veins raised like rivers dried in summer. These were the hands that built beds for my children, the hands that wiped their tears, the hands that buried Margaret. To them, those hands meant nothing now. For a moment, I wondered if they were right. Perhaps I was foolish to cling to wood and brick. Perhaps silence, my refusal to argue harder, had made me weak. If I had shouted louder, fought sooner, would they have thought twice before betraying me? Or was my silent strength the strength to honor a vow, even when the world mocked me for it? I thought of Margaret's last words. "Promise me never sell this house." They echoed inside me louder than Robert's threats, louder than Claire's tears. I had sworn an oath not only to her but to myself. Breaking it would mean breaking the last piece of me still alive. The night deepened. I lit a candle, its flame flickering against the photographs on the mantel. Margaret's smile glowed in the dim light. Daniel's boyish grin stared back from a frame, reminding me that not every child had abandoned me. Distance kept him away, but I believed his heart still stood beside mine. I whispered into the candlelight, "Margaret, am I stubborn or am I faithful?" The flame swayed as though answering. The truth came to me slowly. Silence was no longer enough. I could not sit and hope loyalty would return on its own. Silence had allowed Robert to scheme Claire to surrender neighbors to pity. My silence had been a cage, not a shield. I closed my eyes and felt the house breathe with me. The walls remembered, the floor remembered, the attic remembered. I was not alone, not truly. This house was my witness, my partner, my last battlefield. I rose from the chair joints, aching, but resolve sharper than it had ever been. I looked toward the attic door. The box waited. Margaret waited. The promise waited. "Enough," I whispered into the darkness. "I will not let them bury us, not while I still breathe." Have you ever wondered, does silence make us strong, or does it only let betrayal grow? I had found my answer, and tomorrow I would find my proof. I rose from the chair and walked slowly through each room, letting my fingers trail along the walls. The wallpaper was faded, the wood chipped, but every mark was a reminder of a life lived fully. In the hallway, I touched the dent where Robert had once crashed his tricycle. In the kitchen, I traced the corner where Claire spilled flour and laughed until her cheeks turned red. These were not flaws. They were the fingerprints of memory. Yet to my children, they were only imperfections, reasons to bulldoze, excuses to erase. The thought struck me like lightning. Perhaps it wasn't the house they wanted gone, but the evidence of my existence. To demolish the house was to demolish the proof of what I had built, to silence the story of Margaret and me. I returned to the rocking chair and whispered, "If they destroy this place, what will be left of us?" The silence answered with a groan from the attic above, a sound I had heard 1,000 times but never understood until now. It was as if the house itself refused to surrender. For the first time in weeks, strength stirred inside me. I was not merely an old man waiting for his fate. I was a husband still bound by a promise, a father who once sacrificed everything. If I allowed them to erase me, I would be betraying Margaret, betraying myself. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and made a vow I would no longer be silent. Silence had been my shield, but now it was their weapon. Tomorrow I would climb to the attic. Tomorrow I would open the box. And when I did, the truth would speak louder than Robert's papers, louder than Claire's tears, louder than the lies they had written about me. The night I chose to climb the attic stairs, the house felt different. The air was heavy, but not with despair. Something else lingered. Something like anticipation. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, each step echoing as though the house itself held its breath. For decades I had avoided this place. The attic was Margaret's sanctuary, her vault of memories. Since her death, I had only glanced at the door, too afraid that opening it would tear open wounds I could not survive. But tonight, I was no longer afraid. Fear had been my prison and silence my chain. Now, I was ready to break both. The bulb flickered dimly when I pulled the string. Shadows danced across the dust-thick beams. The box sat in the corner exactly where I remembered, covered in cobwebs, waiting like a patient guardian. My hands shook as I knelt before it. The wood was rough beneath my fingers. Margaret's handwriting faded, but still clear marked the lid for later. My throat tightened. Later had finally come. I pried it open slowly, as though the very air might shatter if I rushed. Inside lay treasures simple yet priceless. A stack of photographs, Margaret smiling with the children in the garden, Claire clutching a doll, Robert holding Daniel on his shoulders. Their faces were young, innocent, untouched by greed. I traced Margaret's face with trembling fingers, whispering, "I remember." Beneath the photos lay a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. I untied it carefully. The first letter was addressed to me. "My love," it began in her delicate handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means time has taken me before you. I leave you this house because it is our story carved into wood and stone. Do not let anyone sell it while you breathe. Promise me again, keep it until your last day. Let the children know it is not theirs to decide. This home belongs to us until the end." Tears blurred the words, but I read them again and again, each sentence striking like a hammer against Robert's forged papers. Here was truth. Her voice, her will not notarized by strangers, but sealed in love. At the bottom of the box lay a cassette tape, its label written in Margaret's familiar hand. "For you." I pulled the old recorder from another box, praying it still worked. When I pressed play, static filled the attic, followed by her voice. Her voice. "Darling," it said softly, trembling, but strong. "If you are alone, remember you are never truly alone. This house holds me. This house holds us. Keep it safe and it will keep you. Promise me one more time." The sound of her laugh followed, faint but unmistakable. I pressed the recorder to my chest, sobbing. She had left me more than memories. She had left me proof. But then I saw it, a sealed envelope at the bottom of the box, my name written on the front. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was another letter signed and dated in Margaret's last weeks, "To whom it may concern. This home is to remain with my husband until his death. No sale, no transfer is to be made against his will. This is my wish, and it must be honored." Her signature flowed across the page, and I saw the faint impressions of her pen strokes. This was no forgery. This was real, tangible, undeniable. I clutched the letter with trembling hands. This was more than sentiment. This was evidence. With handwriting analysis, with ink and paper, dated to the time this could shatter Robert's false claim. I whispered through tears, "You didn't leave me alone, Margaret. You left me the weapon I need." For the first time in weeks, I felt strong. The despair that had chained me fell away. Tomorrow I would not sit silent in court, mocked as senile. Tomorrow I would bring Margaret's voice into the room, her words, her proof, her promise. I gathered the letters, the photos, the tape, and placed them carefully in a satchel. My hand lingered on the box, gratitude flooding through me. The candle flickered, casting light across Margaret's letter. I lifted it high and said aloud, "Tomorrow I fight." That night, after discovering Margaret's box, I stood in front of the mirror with the letter in my hand. The man staring back at me looked frail. His shoulders bent, his eyes clouded with grief, but I forced myself to speak. "Your Honor," I rehearsed, voice trembling, "this is not just paper. This is my wife's voice, my wife's wish." The words cracked. I tried again, louder this time, until the mirror no longer showed weakness, but resolve. I pressed play on the cassette once more, terrified the tape would snap. When Margaret's voice filled the room, I broke, clutching the player to my chest. But every sob forged another piece of armor around my heart. At dawn, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Dad, I heard what Robert is doing. Don't fight alone. I'll be there." My knees gave way, tears flooding my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt strength, not just from Margaret's promise, but from a son who had not forgotten me. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and tension. Robert sat tall beside his lawyer, confidence carved into his smirk. Claire avoided my eyes, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I felt small at the defendant's table, an old man framed as a relic who no longer knew his own mind. Robert's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, the matter is clear. Mr. Miller executed a durable power of attorney granting his eldest son full rights to manage the property. The home has been listed. My client requests the court's approval to finalize the sale." The judge nodded slowly, eyes scanning the paper. My pulse thudded in my ears. This was the moment Robert had schemed for. The gavel hovered ready to strike the end of my story. I rose to my feet, my knees trembling, but my voice steady. Your Honor, before you decide, I have something to present. Gasps rippled through the gallery as I held up a worn envelope and a cassette tape. This letter, written by my late wife, declares her wish that the home remain with me until my death. And this tape carries her voice recorded in her final months. Robert barked a laugh. Forgery. Sentimental junk. The judge lifted a hand. We will allow examination. Experts leaned over the paper under bright lamps. They checked signatures, tested ink, analyzed fibers. The courtroom waited in breathless silence. Finally, the examiner looked up. This letter is authentic. Handwriting, ink, and paper all match the period. Claire gasped, covering her mouth. Robert's face drained of color. The judge set the paper down. Then this case is not so simple. Proceedings are suspended until full review. The gavel struck not to end me, but to give me another chance. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "We're not finished, Margaret." Robert slammed his fist against the table. "This isn't over, old man. You think a letter can stop me? You have no idea what I'm willing to do." The judge's gavel struck again for silence, but his words hung in the air like poison. I held Margaret's letter tighter, knowing the war had only begun. And now I ask you, what would you have done if your own children stood against you in court? Would you fight to the very end? Or would you surrender to silence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for more true-to-heart tales of family betrayal and survival. Thank you for watching.